Hey everybody, good evening. This is Kevin at Fiveable, and I'm excited to walk through some multiple choice review today. I started out Fiveable this with a couple multiple choice sessions, but it's been a while since we've looked at that. And I said back in the fall, don't let multiple choice slip away. Always keep coming back to it. Always keep practicing deliberately in or out of class. There are some extra resources that you can purchase in addition to what you do in class if you want to do more than your teacher is doing in class. Some teachers do a lot of deliberate multiple choice practice in class, and some just do a few. Obviously, what you're reading in class is the key to multiple choice success. So if it's a multiple choice question or not, every single AP text is getting you ready for multiple choice. So I want you to think of it that way as you continue throughout the year. The higher level of a reader that you become this year, the higher your score will be on the multiple choice. Now today we're going to walk through one practice passage and look at some practice questions as well. So that will hopefully be very valuable. If you have a question, go ahead and use the Ask a Question button, and I will come back to it at the end of the live session, if not before. But please make sure you're interactive in terms of don't leave tonight's live session without having your questions answered. All right, so I'm going to jump on into my PowerPoint. Again, I'm excited to walk through multiple choice here with you. But first, let's talk about the next few weeks. So this is a one and done multiple choice session. We'll do a few more before our test day in May, but I do want to take a couple weeks, so the next 2 weeks, we'll be looking at some logical fallacies. It should be a couple fun sessions, so I hope you guys can come back next Tuesday and then the Tuesday after, same exact time. Shouldn't take the full hour. We'll just be looking at some logical fallacies, and we'll be discussing why it is kind of useful to know the terminology, but more importantly, how not to use logical fallacies and how to identify fallacies in logic. Next, I should say, we will be shifting in February to synthesis. So we'll spend the next few weeks in February really hashing out the synthesis prompts. So I'm really excited about that. I really enjoy synthesis prompts. My students typically think that that's their favorite one, and they typically do the best on that. So hopefully you guys will enjoy synthesis as well. But hey, if we want to keep raising our score, come on back to Fiveable every Tuesday. Check out the live sessions. Check out the replays if you miss any. They will always be there for review. So we've gone through argumentation, we've gone through rhetorical analysis in the fall. Now it's time to move into synthesis sooner than later. Tonight we'll focus on multiple choice though. So we'll just take a couple minutes to do a quick review on what to expect come test day. So remember, multiple choice is a 60-minute test. That is how you will start the morning of the AP Lang test. You'll have a little break and then you'll write your 3 essays. So during those 60 minutes, you will have 52 to 55 questions. My prediction is it will be 55 questions. That's what College Board's been doing almost every year consistently in the last decade. Even though it's 1 hour of the 3 hours and 15 minutes of your assessment, it is nearly half of the exam score. So that's why I said in the fall, and that's why I'll say again, don't let multiple choice become an afterthought. Always be pushing for greatness. So first, get this out of the way. I want you to make a game plan. The first minute of the test, quickly flip through. Look what you're dealing with here. Look what the next hour of your life is going to look like. How many passages are there? How many questions are there? Determine how much time you have per passage. If you have 4 passages, which is my prediction because again that's been the recent trend of College Board, it will be 4 or 5 passages, but I think it will be 4 this year. You have 15 minutes per passage. Now that includes the questions as well as the high-level reading. And then determine what order you'll take the test in. Will you start with passage 1 and just move progressively through the end of the test? Or will you be a little bit more strategic? And I think either way is okay. I want you to cater it to your own needs, your own skill set. So you might want to save the most archaic language, the most difficult passage for last. If you have to guess on 5 questions, you might as well guess on 5 questions from the hardest passage. Likewise, I want you to think about spending time. So just because you have 15 minutes per passage doesn't mean you should spend exactly 15 minutes on passage 1, on passage 2, on passage 3, and on passage 4. Maybe passage 1 you can get done effectively in 12 or 13 minutes. That frees up another question or two. So you will notice this, or sorry, another minute or two for future passages. You will notice this. Not every passage has the same amount of questions on it. So there might be a passage with 20 questions on it. Well, if there's only 55 questions, that means there's going to be passages with lots of 20 questions later. So just keeping that in mind. Don't spend too much time on one particular question, but do spend plenty of time reading the passage themselves. So we're going to talk about that for the first half of our session today. Again, I just talked about the time breakdown. If you have 5 passages, it's 12 minutes per passage. Again, I expect it to be 4 passages equaling 15 minutes on average per passage. Okay, so how to determine text difficulty? You'll look at the year of publication. The older the text, the harder it's going to be, most likely. And you'll also just do a quick skim of the organization of the text. If you have 80 lines and it's 1 paragraph, that is going to be difficult because then it's your job, not the author's job, to indicate a shift in topic or tone. A paragraph shift is actually to your benefit because the author's cluing to us as readers, I'm about to shift my topic or tone slightly, or maybe more than slightly. If there's 80 lines of a paragraph, the author certainly is going to shift most likely throughout, but I've got to be a good enough reader to identify those shifts. So again, a lot of my students like to start with the easiest passage and end with the hardest because of the things that we discussed. We don't want to get lost in the hardest passage first and then not get to finish the rest of the exam, which might be a little bit easier. Now this is an optional step. I actually encourage my students to not do this step. A couple of them do, but most of them I don't think it works for. So some teachers say do this, some teachers say don't. Just keep in mind, what do you want to do? Cater it to your needs. Again, with caution here. So the optional step is skim through the question stems first. Maybe that'll help you guide your reading. Why I've cautioned my students away from that is because a lot of times if you see the question first, it's very tempting to just go searching for the answer. College Board is not going to make it that easy. You have to read at a high level. You have to read lines 1 to the end. You have to answer these questions in context or you will not get them right. Sometimes the second best answer, or maybe even the worst answer, but a wrong answer will look right if you don't read in context. So if I just go to line 20 because that's what's cited, maybe they give me a throwaway answer that if I only read lines 20 and 21, it sounds right. Make sure you're reading in context. Make sure if you're skimming through the question stems first, that does not take away the need to read at a high level throughout. So here's how to approach every multiple choice passage, no matter what order you're taking them in. If it's easy, if it's medium, if it's difficult, this is what I want you to do. First, read the background information. It will be at the start of the text. It will be right before line 1. It will, I think, be in italics. I think they do that pretty much every year. It'll only be a couple sentences. Read that. They give that to you intentionally. College Board chooses difficult passages. Please read the italics because they're trying to give you a little bit of a clue or a little bit of background knowledge that will make your reading easier. Second, read to comprehend. So take your time to read. Don't even worry about the questions yet. Most of you, or if not all of you, don't even worry about that optional step that we just talked about. Just read to read. If you comprehend, you will get a lot of the questions right. And then annotate as you go. The ideal time to annotate and read is 8 or 9 minutes of the 15. So if I've got 4 passages, I'm taking about 8 minutes. That's a little bit more than half of my time reading, annotating, and thinking. Because if I'm doing those things, the questions will be a breeze. I can do 30 seconds per question, I promise. Now, there might be a couple questions you cut your losses on and say, dang it, I might be able to get this right if I had infinite time, but the reality is you don't. If you spend 8 to 9 minutes reading, you have less than 30 seconds per question. You've got to keep it moving. So there might be a couple questions you take your best guess on and move on. Let's keep going. My students often, I talked about this in the fall for those of you who were with me then, my students often do not like to annotate or don't really annotate effectively. So there's really only 2 reasons to annotate for AP language. The first is to keep you engaged. We've all been there where if you're if your hands are limp, if you don't have a pencil in your hand and you are simply reading, your eyes get droopy. You start to look at words but not decode them. You start to not understand what you're reading. We've all been there, especially likely on an AP passage. And actually, for my higher level students, this is what gets them bought in. They're like, hey, Mr. Steinhauser, I can read without a pencil and stay engaged. And obviously that's true sometimes, maybe all times for some students. But I believe annotations will save you time. You're going to flip back to your annotations in those 30-second windows per question. So if the question is on line 20, I will go back to line 20, look at my annotations around it, re-ground myself in the text, remember what's going on with the nuance of the text around that area, and then I'll be able to answer the question much more quickly. If I go back without just to a blank text with no annotations, it's going to take me longer to answer each question. So I'm going to spend the time up front reading and annotating, but that's an investment in the multiple choice round. That's how I'm able to get each question in 30 to 40 seconds. All right, so as we annotate, simply 3 things I want you to do. And if I'm going too fast, you can always just go back to the replay. And like I said, if I'm going too fast or if you want me to explain anything a little bit more thoroughly, please let me know in the questions and we'll circle back. The reason I'm going quick today, I've taken a longer time with this in a former session in the fall. I want to spend most of our time practicing tonight. But very quickly, AP annotations. First, I want you to underline key phrases. They will anchor you in the text both during the initial read, and I can go back and reread my underlined phrases to re-ground myself during the multiple choice flipping back and forth round. Second, every chunk of text that you identify in topic or tone, I actually write brackets and just write a quick bullet point. I'll show you my annotations tonight on our practice passage so you see exactly how this should look. Clarify vague pronouns. Circle he, circle she, circle it. Draw a line back to it. If it's not super obvious, you might know it now, but I don't want you to forget and say, oh crap, what was it referring back to in line 20, and have to take 30 seconds to find it. Take the 2 seconds it takes to track it in case you need it for later. Now, I have a few students who ask me every year, do I really have to annotate your way? And I say, hey, if you have a better way, do it. But the only way to prove that you have a better way is getting higher scores. And I'll be honest, a couple students every year do it their way, and they get great scores. Most of my students do it this way. Once they practice, they realize this is the way to really open up higher level scores. Spending the time in upfront annotating opens up higher scores. After reading and annotating, spend the rest of the time, so 6 or 7 minutes, answering the questions. Again, it depends on how many questions there are, obviously. This is for 15 minutes of a passage. You might have to spend 16 or 17 minutes on one. That just means you spend 13, 14 on the next. Right, so just keeping that in mind. Again, flipping back to your annotations. So College Board will actually, they're being friendly to you actually here. Every page, the left, because you have a pamphlet which you'll have like 2 pages open at once. The left page will be the text. The right page will be the questions. I actually encourage you, even if it's right in front of you, flip the page back if you're on question 13, right? So you're on just another printing of that passage. So let's say questions 1 to 10 were on the right, and I flipped. I have the passage again in front of me, and then I have questions 11 to 15. If I'm on 13, I actually flip back to my annotations because that's the whole point of annotating. If I've done all the work, I might as well take this 2 seconds to flip and look at it. Quickly reread the context around the lines. Don't think just because it says line 20, the answer is in line 20. They're just giving you what they're quoting in the question. We'll see that tonight. All right, so a couple test-taking strategies, and then we'll get going here with our practice round. So obviously, you're going to use process of elimination to briskly move through the passage. Please don't, like I said, get lost in the question. If you're down to 2 answer choices, hey, that's 50% chance of getting it right. You can't take any more time. Take your best guess and move on. Now, if you're out of time on a passage, guess on 1 or 2 if you need to. And every time you guess, use the same letter. Just statistically, maybe you'll get 1 or 2 of them right. Those are low-hanging fruit, but we're going to do everything we can to get every question right that we can. All right, time to practice. So I'm going to show you a practice passage, and I'm going to just read it, walk through how I would annotate. We'll do that pretty quickly, but that's the first part of our practice today. And the second part of our practice, we'll actually look at some AP release questions. So this is a one-sentence context background info that I want to always read. Let's read it. The following passage is from an essay published in the late 20th century. Okay, I'm going to be honest, that was not a super useful sentence, right? But it's useful to look at just to kind of ground myself, at least in the time period. So they're often going to be this simple. So it's not going to tell me a lot about what I'm about to read, but it will get me grounded a little bit. So 20th century, late 20th century. The way I've outlined these slides is I actually typed up a practice passage. I underlined what I would have actually underlined through annotating. And I wrote in the margins what I would actually write in the margins. All right, so let's go ahead and read. I am a writer. And by that definition, and I underline this, I am someone who has always loved language. So I underline phrases that make sense. I can quickly go back and skim through my annotations. I don't have to read everything. I just reread to ground myself what I'm underlining, and I skim through my marginal annotations. So let's keep reading. I am fascinated by language in daily life. I spend a great deal of my time thinking about the power of language, the way it can evoke an emotion, a visual image, a complex idea, or a simple truth. Language is the tool of my trade, and I use them all the Englishes I grew up with. So I want to show you a trick that I always do when I annotate. Look at the last sentence with me. I didn't underline every word intentionally. This one, not necessarily a super crucial use of this strategy, but the strategy is I only underline the key phrases that if I just read the words I underlined, it still makes sense, and it grounds me back in the text. So let's just read what I underlined. And I use all the Englishes I grew up with. It just saves me a little bit of time. This is especially useful when authors use appositives and all these extra flowery phrases, and I just want to get to the core of their sentence. So here I only cut 2 words. There will be times when I cut 2 or 3 lines, and I'm just getting to the core of their sentence. So again, and I use all the Englishes I grew up with. So my annotations very quickly, and you might want to use shorthand. I don't want you spending a ton of time actually writing your annotations. I want you, as you're reading, thinking, what should I write in the margin? Because if I know what to write in the margin, I comprehend the text. So simply put, language has power. She grew up with multiple Englishes. Again, doesn't have to be full sentences. It should not be full sentences. It should be straight to the point. Here's what the author's saying. Next, I only underlined the first sentence here. Topic sentences are very crucial. Now, this is a friendly passage because it's split into pretty short paragraphs, right? So far, we've already got 2. Please note that if I don't know what I'm reading, I go back and I reread it and I ground myself. It takes more time than I want, but at least I'm giving myself a chance. So I have to take the time it takes to comprehend well. Let's read. Recently, I was made keenly aware of the different Englishes I do use. I was giving a talk to a large group of people, the same talk I had already given to half a dozen other groups. The nature of the talk was about my writing, my life, and my book. Oh, that's a typo. The Joy Luck Club. So this is Amy Tan. A lot of you might have read an excerpt of the Joy Luck Club, or Mother Tongue is this essay actually that it's excerpt out of. So you might be familiar with this writer. My annotation, though, if I'm familiar with it or not, she gave a talk about writing. I'm going to jot that down really quickly. I'm bracketing this section of the text because I just don't want to have to reread this. I want to see the flow of the text as I'm looking through my marginal annotations. Now, this is actually the same paragraph. So I've chunked it for you today. So this is the first chunk, and then here we get into the meat of the paragraph. The talk was going along well enough until I remembered one major difference that made the whole talk sound wrong. My mother was in the room, and it was perhaps the first time she had heard me give a lengthy speech using the kind of English I have never used with her. So I underline that because that's what pops out. That's the core content here. I was saying things like the intersection of memory upon imagination, and there is an aspect of my fiction that relates to thus and thus. A speech filled with carefully wrought grammatical phrases, burdened, it suddenly seemed to me, with nominalized forms, past perfect tenses, conditional phrases, all forms of standard English that I had learned in school and through books. The forms of English I did not use at home with my mother. Now, you'll see here what I was talking about a moment ago. Let's read just my underline in the second half of this section. It still makes sense, it still flows, but I'm taking out some of those extra phrases. I have to comprehend and read those extra phrases, but on my second read, if I have to go back to the section for a multiple choice question, this is all I'm skimming through. A speech filled with carefully wrought grammatical phrases burdened with nominalized forms that I had learned in school, etc. So I'm just taking out some of those extra phrases to save me time on a reread. And then, obviously, if you're annotating in the margins, you might use shorthand and really get to the point here. My annotation was her academic language seemed out of place because her mother was in the room. So that's the idea I'm getting my annotations. I would, if I were you, even write it in a more shortly expressed way because time matters a lot in multiple choice. Now, this is a new paragraph. So she's indicating, okay, I'm going to have a shift in topic or tone here. Let's go ahead and read. Just last week, I was walking down the street with my mother, and I again found myself conscious of the English I was using. Notice I haven't underlined a lot here, so less is more sometimes. Keep that in mind as we continue. I'm only underlining the most crucial pieces. So the English I do use with her. I'm going to read that sentence again. Just last week, I was walking down the street with my mother, and I again found myself conscious of the English I was using. The English I do use with her. We were talking about the price of new and used furniture, and I heard myself saying this, not waste money that way. My husband was with us as well, and he didn't notice any switch in my English. And then I realized why. It's because over the 20 years we've been working together, I've often used that same kind of English with him, and sometimes he even uses it with me. It has become our language of intimacy, a different sort of English that relates to family talk, the language I grew up with. My annotation, again, write this as quickly as you can. With her family, switching to a different English seems natural and intimate. So you can obviously shorthand that when you're actually annotating yourself under a time setting. But that's the point of this passage, of this section of the passage. Now this is another paragraph. So really, this hasn't been bad because I've only had to identify the shift in one paragraph without her breaking the paragraph for me so far. Let's keep reading. So you'll have some idea of what this family talk I heard sounds like. I'll quote what my mother said during a recent conversation, which I videotaped and then transcribed. So she's about to quote, and if you skim down, you'll see there's a colon. So what comes right after the colon is going to be her mother's quote. She's going to set it up a little bit more here. But all that I really need to know here is she's setting up quoting her mother. So all I'm underlining, I'll quote what my mother said during a recent conversation. But let's see the context. Let's keep reading. During this conversation, my mother was talking about a political gangster in Shanghai who had the same last name as her family's do, and how the gangster in his early years wanted to be adopted by her family, which was rich by comparison. Later, the gangster became more powerful, far richer than my mother's family, and one day showed up at my mother's wedding to pay his respects. Here's what he said in part. I literally take 5 seconds to just bracket that paragraph and say, context for mother's family talk. Boom, I'm ready to read. I hope that as we're reading this together, you feel pretty confident in this text. So I chose this text not because it's an easy one, although I'd say as far as College Board passages go, this one's kind of towards the middle actually of difficulty, but probably a little bit on the easy side of the spectrum. Definitely not the hardest you'll see, because I want you focusing tonight on, again, how would you annotate as you go to save time? And then we're going to really focus on the questions here in a couple minutes. So here's the quote from Mother. And you'll see I literally did not underline a thing because it's all family talk. It's all mother's talk. And that's all I have in the margins. So let's go ahead and read it. You see the quote is this entire paragraph. Do you some having business like fruit stand, like off the street king. He is do like do Zong, but not Su Ming Island people. The local people call Putong the river east side. He belonged to that side local people. That man went to ask Duzong, father, take him in like become his own family. Duzong, father, wasn't looked down on him, but didn't take seriously until that man big like become a mafia. Now important person, very hard to inviting him. Chinese way came only to show respect, don't stay for dinner. Respect for making big celebration, he shows up. Mean gives lots of respect. Chinese custom. Chinese social life, that way. If too important, won't have to stay too long. He come to my wedding, I didn't see. I heard it. I gone to boys' side. They have YMCA dinner. Chinese age, I was 19. Okay, now if you're like me, I get the gist of this paragraph, but I definitely don't have like a good sense of fluency as I'm reading, right? But that's exactly her point. As she's building this passage, she's juxtaposing academic English with what she calls family talk. You might hear it called broken English. In fact, in her full essay, which my students are just reading in class this week, she uses that term at times, broken English. Why it's called broken is because the rules of grammar are broken at times. But she calls it in this excerpt family talk. Throughout this excerpt, she's saying it's very different than academic language. Let's finish off this excerpt and see what she says about this language. Now, I'm not going to waste any time under a time setting rereading Mother's Family Talk because I understand she's quoting her mother kind of at length here to show what it looks like, and that's about it. I have a sense that this is what her mother talks like, and this is how she talks to her mother at times, and that's really all I have to get. I don't have to get this in a high level nuance like I do most parts of the passage, because this is literally serving one function. It's citing how her mother talks. Now we're shifting completely back to the author talking about the family talk. You should know that my mother's expressive command of English belies how much she actually understands. She reads the Forbes report, listens to Wall Street Week, converses daily with her stockbroker, reads all of Shirley MacLaine's books with ease. All kinds of things I can't begin to understand. Yet some of my friends tell me they understand 50% of what my mother says. Some say they understand 80 to 90%. Some say they understand none of it, as if she were speaking pure Chinese. This is pretty easy to understand, so just taking a minute to make sure we're underlining the right things, not too much, just a couple sentences here, and then annotating quickly in the margins. Her mother understands English well. Not everyone can understand her. Boom, let's move on. But to me, same paragraph, I hope the shift is clear, but to me. So that's why I bracketed it or chunked it differently here. But to me, my mother's English is perfectly clear, perfectly natural. It's my mother tongue. Her language as I hear it is vivid, direct, full of observation and imagery. That was the language that helped shape the way I saw things, expressed things, made sense of the world. So I quickly write, her mother's language is beautiful to her. Let's keep going. I'm sorry, let's keep going to the multiple choice round. So we're going to start with number one. Sorry if it's a little blurry on your screen, but we're going to start with number one. I'm going to just walk you through verbally this, but if you really want a challenge, answer it before I show you the answer. So really be engaged. So I'm going to read A, B, C, D, E, and I'm going to show you. This is my essential way of flipping back to the passage. So I'm going to go to line 6 and 7. Remember, I do not only read line 6 and 7. I literally would have just read that passage, and then I go here. For a lot of us, this is the first time I'm seeing this question. So I have to read it in context. I'm going back to my annotation. But let's read. The final sentence of the first paragraph, line 6 and 7, is unusual in the way it uses. Now this is actually what I'm going to do. I'm not going to read A, B, C, D, and E yet. I'm going to flip back to my annotations and try to get the answer in my head. So look at the last sentence with me. Okay, language is power, grew up with multiple Englishes, and I use them all the Englishes I grew up with. Now, what's unusual about it? Well, Englishes stands out to me. I've never heard that before outside of this passage. English is usually not plural. So let's look. First person pronoun. Which one is it, guys? verb tense, plural noun, capital letter, dangling participle. If you don't know what a dangling participle is, I'm going to be honest with you. It's valuable to know. I'm not going to waste time talking about it tonight. But they're going to throw at you sometimes grammatical terms as distractors. It is going to be rare that a term you've never heard of is actually the correct answer. So use process of elimination. Don't get rid of it. But if it's down to two, choose the one that you're more familiar with. So that's just kind of a test-taking tip that I have for you. If it's a word you've never seen, your teacher probably did not miss it, right? It's probably just a distractor. So it's not E. What do you think? Answer C, plural noun, Englishes. All right, let's do number 2. I'm still in the first paragraph. College Board's pretty friendly, where they will track most of the time chronologically through the text. Still read it all for completion first. Don't read paragraph 1, then go to the questions on paragraph 1 and back and forth. Just read paragraph 1 well. You read it 3-4 minutes ago in the time setting, right? You'll still have it as long as your annotations are on point. So let's read. The function of the first paragraph is to. Let's go back to our annotations. Let's get our answer in our mind. So again, language has power, and then she states growing up with multiple Englishes. She says, I'm someone who has always loved language, and I use them all the Englishes I grew up with. All right, so let's read A through E. I do this as fast as I can, but not so fast that I'm not reading A through E. I'm always going to read them to C. I should have the answer in my head, so think about what the function is, and let's see which A, B, C, D, or E best lines up with the answer I would write down if my teacher asked me the function of the first paragraph. What's the answer in my head already? So let's read. Explain the purpose of the passage. Define the relationship between literary language and everyday speech. Describe the author's writing process. Characterize the author and her interests. And establish the author's concern about the misuse of language. So just based on our quick skim back through of the annotations, what do we think it is? So looking back at them very quickly. Answer is D. Let's go back to D. It characterizes the author and her interests. I am a writer. I am someone who has always loved language. It's all characterizing the author there. I'm going to go quickly through these. And again, if there's time at the end of any questions that we want to go back through more thoroughly, please shout them out at me, and we'll make sure that no one leaves tonight without having every single question answered or in your head. Anything that you have, please let me know. Question number 3. In context, carefully wrought suggests both. Let's just, before we even look at A through E, let's reread that sentence. Carefully wrought. So I don't have lines here, but you see carefully wrought. I actually have to read in context. Ooh, this is a long sentence, but let's take time to read it. I was saying things like, so remember, this is at the speech when she realizes it seems out of place because her mother was in the room. So during the speech, I was saying things like, the intersection of memory upon imagination, and there is an aspect of my fiction that relates to thus and thus. A speech filled with carefully wrought, there it is, grammatical phrases burdened with nominalized forms that I had learned in school. And let's read the whole thing. A speech filled with carefully wrought grammatical phrases, burdened it suddenly seemed to me, with nominalized forms, past perfect tenses, conditional phrases. Okay, these are all just very grammatical terminology, right? All forms of standard English that I had learned in school and through books, the forms of English I did not use at home. In context, carefully wrought suggests both. So I'm just thinking of the connotation. Burdened is a key here, right? And then just focusing on the very particular grammar terminology. So let's read through it. Have your answer in your mind, then we'll see what it is. A, precision and formlessness. B, beauty and permanence. C, simplicity and perfection. D, nervousness and self-control. E, technical mastery and craftsmanship. So this is definitely a process of elimination. I can't take too long. I'm going to cross out beauty first and simplicity first, because those are actually antonyms here. Carefully wrought with burdened phrases. So we're down to A, D, and E. Take your best shot at it. What do you think it is? Precision and formlessness, nervousness and self-control, technical mastery, and craftsmanship. Answer's E. Let's check it out. Technical mastery and craftsmanship. The second best answer is precision, A, and formlessness. Precision's right, but formlessness is incorrect. That's going to happen a lot on the AP test, where if they give you two words, one of them will be right. Make sure that it's 100% correct. Technical mastery and craftsmanship, that goes with all of these phrases here. Nominalized forms, past perfect tenses, conditional phrases. These are all things that are technically mastered. They're forms of standard English. All right, let's get 4. Hey, this is a word that we just thought about. So this should not take long, right? If I'm in a time setting, the word burdened modifies. I was just in this section. So this is kind of what I was talking about way back at the beginning of the live session tonight. I said clarify vague pronouns. This isn't a pronoun, so it's not exactly the same. But what it modifies, I have to go back. Most likely it's going to be previously and see what is burdened lining up with. So here's burdened. Let's see what it is. So I would actually go back, figure it out, and then just confirm it here. I would not use process of elimination here. Like I wouldn't go things, is it to burden, intersection, is it to burden, aspect, is it to burden, speech, is it to burden, me, am I burdened? I would just reread, circle burden, draw a line to it. I was saying things like the intersection of memory upon imagination, and there's an aspect of my fiction that relates to thus and thus. A speech filled with carefully wrought grammatical phrases. Burdened, it seems suddenly to me, with all these forms of standard English. A speech burdened with all of these things. Answers D, speech. Not things, not intersection. Hopefully, you're able to get that right. This was the easiest question, I believe, so far. Speech burdened with nominalized forms. In part, that's why it's great to have this skill that I'm showing you with my annotations, only underlining the core of the sentence, not getting lost in all of these extra phrases. All right, we're going to do some more practice rounds. Again, if you have questions, shout them out at me. 5, during the talk described in paragraph 2. So we're moving to paragraph 2. The author responds to her mother's presence by. Let's look at our annotations and let's go back and read A, B, C, D, and E. These are long, but I do think you should read every word just quickly of A, B, C, D, and E. So let's read it again. During the talk described in paragraph 2, the author responds to her mother's presence by. This is paragraph 2 as a whole. We were actually just looking at part of it with the burden and nominalized forms, etc. But I'm zooming out and looking at the entire paragraph 2. Her academic language seemed out of place because her mother was in the room. That's my annotations. Let's look at how the question's worded again. The author responds to her mother's presence by. Let's just reread what I underlined. My mother was in the room, and it was perhaps the first time she had heard me give a lengthy speech, using the kind of English I have never used with her. A speech filled with carefully wrought grammatical phrases burdened with nominalized forms that I had learned in school and through books. The forms of English I did not use at home with my mother. So I get this passage. Now let's go see which lines up. During the talk, the author responds to her mother's presence by A. As we're going just on your own, thinking through process of elimination, then we'll look at the answer. A. Altering the vocabulary and syntax she had been using to express her ideas to the group. B. Regretting that there are certain interests she does not share with her mother. C. Thinking about how audience determines the appropriateness of a style. D. re-examining the mother-daughter themes in her latest work. E, deciding that her mother does not need to learn academic English. These are worded a little bit tricky at times, but I believe there's one very clear answer. Have it in your head and I'll show it to you in about 5 seconds. The answer is C. Thinking about how audience determines the appropriateness of style. Really, A, B, D, and E, there are all pieces of those that are just wrong, that are not in the text. Now, I have read already with you all, so you've read this entire passage. Because, hey, what if the next paragraph she talked about E or A or whatever? So I know, okay, I didn't see any of those things in future paragraphs. She does not seem to regret in B. She does not seem to think that her mother does not need to learn academic English. It doesn't say one way or the other, right? So let's keep reading, or let's go back here and look at it. So again, let's look at C. Thinking about how audience determines the appropriateness of a style. She's thinking of audience here. She's juxtaposing, like I said earlier, academic English, which is appropriate in her speech setting, with informal English that she speaks at home, what she calls family talk. Number 6. Now we're on to the third paragraph. The third paragraph provides. Let's just quickly skim back through our annotations. Just last week, I again found myself conscious of the English I was using. I'm just going to look at my, I'm going to skim through. Okay, this is where she talks about her husband and her mom, all kind of interchanging family talk with the way she, what I would say, normally talks now, right? Her academic talk. Look at the last couple sentences, or the last couple things I underline. It has become our language of intimacy that relates to family talk. So skimming through my annotations, with her family switching to a different English seems natural and intimate. Let's read through, see which one you think it is. The third paragraph provides a concrete examples of how writers transform personal experience into art. Is that what she's doing here? Okay, B, a series of assertions about the nature of language. Hold on. She's not asserting or claiming many things, a series of things. So I'm definitely crossing that out, right? C, a rationale for the author's shifting allegiances. Some of you might be thinking, okay, her allegiances are different. She's allegiant to academic language at some times, family talk at other times. Well, she never really calls it allegiance. So I'm going to not love that. Maybe I'll leave it there for process of elimination, but I'm leaning to no. But hold on. I don't see a rationale anywhere here. Okay, so I'm definitely crossing out C. All right, let's go to D. An anecdote that reinforces ideas expressed in the previous paragraphs. And lastly, E, an argument that will be challenged in the remainder of the passage. An argument that will be challenged in the remainder of the passage. Okay, I've read the whole passage. I don't really see an argument here. So it should be down to A and D. A concrete example of how writers transform personal experience into art, or an anecdote that reinforces ideas expressed in the previous paragraph. Which is it? So Ben says, or the best answer is D, an anecdote that reinforces ideas expressed in previous paragraphs. The ideas expressed in previous paragraphs are about family talk. She elaborates on it here. The anecdote is here. Which of the following, number 7, which of the following is true of the mother's quoted speech in lines 52 to 67? Okay, remember this? I literally did not annotate it other than said this is her family talk. I'm not going to, for this one, reread anything. I'm going to go A, B, C, D, E, and see if we can get it. I remember it well enough, though, right? So A, just have your idea in mind. I'm not going to say anything here. I'm just going to read through and tell you the answer. The challenge here is just see if you can get this one right using process of elimination. So A, the author expects the speech to be comprehensible enough to enable her to make a point about her mother's use of language. B, the author is concerned that her mother will change the way she talks because she's being videotaped. C, the author uses the speech as an example of the way her mother talked when the author was young, not the way her mother talks now. D, the author wants to suggest that it is her mother's accent, not her syntax, that makes her English difficult to understand. I'll just say, remember, syntax is sentence structure. And E, the author is more interested in what her mother says in the speech than in the way she says it. I'll give you 5 seconds to relook at it. You need to have the answer in your head. So the answer, I hope you got it, is A. I think this one was actually pretty easy. The author expects the speech to be comprehensible enough to enable her to make a point about it. She's using it to make a point. Let's just quickly go through these. B, she never says she's worried about the way she talks. In fact, she's quoting her because it's the way that she talks, right? C, the author uses the speech as an example of the way her mother talked when the author was young, not the way her mother talks now. There's no indication anywhere in the passage that her mother has changed the way she talks. So that's just completely wrong. D, the author wants to suggest that it is her mother's accent, not her syntax. No, that's exactly wrong. It's all about the words in the sentence structure. That's the whole point of this essay. Nothing to do with an accent. And then E is, again, completely wrong. The author is more interested in what her mother says in the speech than the way she says it. No, the whole point of it is it's how she says it, the way she says it. To say, this is what family talk looks like. All right, we're going to do number 8. The effect of using the second person pronoun in lines 40 and 68 is to. All right, if I don't know what second person pronoun is, I can still have a fighting chance here because they tell me line 40 and 68. So I'm just going to show you one. This is one of those 2 examples. You should know that my mother's express. Okay, so the pronoun's you. So just a reminder, you should know this. First person's I, me, my. Second person's you, your. Third person's he, she, they. Okay, so you should know that my mother's expressive command of English belies how much she actually understands. You should know that my mother's expressive command of English belies how much she actually understands. That's one of 2. It's the same answer for either one, so we'll just look at that. I believe that was the one from line 68. Okay, pretend you didn't see me flash up the answer. That was my bad. Let's read through these. A, emphasize the author's awareness of an audience. B, illustrate the effectiveness of using informal diction when speaking publicly. C, indicate a shift in focus from the personal to the impersonal. D, echo the style of the author's talk described in paragraph 2. Or E, enlarge the scope of the discussion to include differences in usage by native speakers of English. All right, so you probably saw, I didn't mean to go to that next slide. The answer's A. Hopefully you would have got it anyway. She's emphasizing she's aware of an audience. You should know. She's talking directly to the audience there. That one shouldn't be too hard either. So I've spent my time reading and annotating these questions. I'm talking about a lot, but you could do these pretty quickly on your own. Number 9. The first 2 sentences in the last paragraph do which of the following? So line 68 to 73, but let's just honestly reread these 2 sentences. I emphasized in my annotations the first one, but let's read them both. I'm going to skim my annotations first. Her mother understands English well. That's the point of this section. So you should know that my mother's expressive command of English belies how much she actually understands. She reads the Forbes report, listens to Wall Street Week, converses daily with her stockbroker, reads all of Shirley MacLaine's books with ease. All kinds of things I can't begin to understand. The first 2 sentences do which of the following? A, define ambiguous terms. B, develop vivid metaphors. C, explain convoluted reasoning. D, resolve disagreements. and E, present contrasts. Have your answer in mind. Okay, the answer is E, present contrasts. This one's a little bit tougher. A lot of people on the test would have put C, but there is no convoluted reasoning here. She is just simply saying the contrast is my mother doesn't necessarily sound like she has a command of English, but she does. So the way that she sounds is contrasted with her actual abilities and actual ability to read. That's the contrast here. There is no convoluted reasoning. Convoluted means like messy or just lengthy. There's nothing ambiguous here. There are no metaphors, and there's no disagreement. So A, B, and D, we should be able to cross out pretty quickly. C and E, we're left with. Hopefully you see the contrast here. I have to read it in context, because really I have to see her family talk that we just looked at before this paragraph to make sure I got it. All right, number 10. In the last paragraph, the author insists on the, let's just look at the last paragraph again. Oh, we're still here. Okay, good. A, just have your answer in mind. Remember, this is, let's not go too fast. This is where she's still talking, or this is where exactly where she's saying, hey, my mother understands more than you realize. And then remember, it goes on to say, I didn't copy it here, but it goes on to say, some people understand her, some people don't. Some people don't. So let's see. In the last paragraph, the author insists on the A, importance of an expressive command of standard English. B, sophistication of some of her mother's English language skills. C, inherent value of the books her mother chooses to read. Okay, she says her mother reads books, but she doesn't talk about the value of the books, so C's gone. D, need for language learners to practice on a wide variety of written materials. Or E, value of reading as a means of improving the language skills of non-native speakers. What's the answer? Have it in your head. I'll show you in a second. B, let's look at B. Hopefully this is what you had. Sophistication of some of her mother's English language skills. Some of you could argue, I kind of see E in here. Which one's the more direct answer? What is the author insisting on? I promise my mother knows English. She actually understands it. That's what she's insisting on. Maybe it is valuable, but that's not really what she's arguing here. Okay, that is it for tonight. We had 10 questions. Hopefully you feel pretty good about them. Remember, we are doing logical fallacies next week. Let's look at one question, though, before we wrap up tonight. All right, so it says, what if the annotations have nothing to do with the question? This is a really good question. So you are going to annotate to read and comprehend. You are not going to annotate to answer the question. Now, that's my recommendation. A teacher that you have might say, hey, go annotate for the question. This is what I have found to be most successful. So this is the question we're on. What I really want to focus on is annotating to read. So you will see throughout my PowerPoint tonight, I had many annotations that I actually never had to revisit. But the annotations helped me with a holistic view of the text, and that's what this is all about. So it's a great question. You are going to, I hope, over-annotate, which means you're going to have more annotations than you need. And that's exactly the problem I want you to have. Now, keep in mind, I said don't spend too much time annotating. Spend the time reading and thinking. Just quickly jot down your annotations. But you are absolutely going to sometimes run into that exact, I wouldn't call it a problem, but that exact situation where I've annotated every paragraph something. Not every single thing I write down is going to align with the question. All right, so that's a great question. Guys, thanks for sticking with it tonight. I hope you can come back the next couple of weeks. We'll have a couple of fun sessions just looking at some logical fallacies. It's really fun to point out flaws in people's logic. My students, when they learn historically the terminology, they like to call out each other with that's a logical fallacy in their logic. That's great because then you're not going to use it in your own writing. So we're going to do a little bit of review the next couple weeks on what not to do in argumentative writing. And synthesis, which we're doing in February, is argumentative writing, just a different style of it. So really, we're launching into synthesis through looking at logical fallacies the next 2 weeks. All right, everyone have a great weekend, and I will see you next Tuesday.